Hello again, everybody. My name is John D. Healy. I'm back again with another podcast. It's called It's Good to Talk. It sure is good to talk. I always have interesting guests on. Today is no exception. I'm looking forward to having a great conversation with this gentleman. His name is Michael Mentel. But before that, let me do my usual promos. I produced this book for my friend Tony McGurn. It's his life story from 1941 up until recently. Lots of stories in it. And one of the stories in this book will connect with stories that my next guest has. Because believe it or not, there's a bit of gun running in this book too. You can buy the book on Amazon. It's also on audio. My sponsors are Liffey Van Lines, moving company here in New York City. And they've been around longer than Jeopardy, longer than the marathon, running very, very smooth. People do ask me weird questions. Pianos, yes, they move pianos. Storage, yes, they have storage. Commercial jobs, yes. We moved stars. We even moved the edge. Someone gave me a comment the other day about Bono. I said, I like Bono. And they got, oh, I don't like Bono. Well, I like Bono. Anyways, before I move on to my guest, I always give a shout out to Irish Examiner USA, a newspaper here in New York City. Great stories about music. This week, Phil Coulter is being interviewed. Paddy McCarthy is the editor, producer. That's a great interview with Phil Coulter. And Paddy McCarthy, my singer, will be on to sing a song for us too. And the other day on my last podcast, Jimmy Grady sang a song called The Bright Blue Rose. The writer of the song was not Jimmy Grady. He's a singer, I'm a talker. It was Jimmy McCarthy. I pondered, I said, is Jimmy McCarthy related to Paddy McCarthy? And would you believe it? Believe it or believe it not, and you heard it here, Paddy McCarthy and Jimmy McCarthy are best buddies. But we'll move on because I have a lot to talk about today. I will be exploring the 1981 Irish hunger strike. Hold up that book there. And my guest is Michael Mentel. And Michael, say hello to my audience and tell me a little bit about you before we delve into the Irish hunger strike 1981.
Well, thank you, John. First of all, thank your listeners, but I also want to thank you for the privilege of being on your podcast today. This is it's truly something that I look forward to from the time we first met, and I'm grateful that you're having me on today. A little bit about myself here. I basically grew up Irish Catholic American on the Irish Catholic west side of Columbus, Ohio, and my family going back several generations without question, but most recently, the last turn of the century, my great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents and my grandparent immigrated from Ireland and were really very, very staunch in their pride of their heritage. So growing up with my parents, with my aunts, uncles, the center of all the activity was basically my grandparents' house. And it really, really instilled from a young age our pride in our heritage. The level of involvement with my family in following and being engaged in their heritage, it didn't begin and end, and I don't say this as a criticism of anyone, but it did not begin and end just on March 17th. It was really a 365-day a year event. Any time that we had an opportunity, even when I was very young and didn't understand what was being discussed, I knew, how can I say it? I did not know the subject matter of being discussed, but I knew what was being discussed. And if it wasn't the grandkids and what they're up to, and if it wasn't local politics, it was Ireland. What was going on? The civil strife going on in the 60s, leading up through the Troubles, during the Troubles, but also recollection from at least my grandmother, how it was before and after partition. So I had this very strong pride and, how can I put it, very strong, and wanted to delve in more, what my heritage was, how it was.
Would you say that
had the privilege
would you say it came more from your grandmother or your grandfather, or both?
Actually, both. My grandmother is the most immediate. Her father, my great-grandfather, actually came over here first in the early teens to the early part of the last turn of the century with a friend of his to get work here in the States, saved the money, then sent back for my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my great-uncles, my great-aunt. Ironically, he's had to send back to Perth, Scotland, because they went over there because my great-grandmother's family had family and they could help with the children while he was taking care of business here and getting employment in the United States. And they moved over here to an area that was predominantly an Irish community when
Right.
they arrived in Columbus eventually. My mother's side as well, by the way.
What part of Ireland
I don't want to neglect
do you recall? What part of Ireland were they from? Probably were they like West Coast, like Mayo, Sligo?
Sligo, Tipperary.
Okay.
And it eventually ended up my great grandfather, because of circumstances, was actually technically born in Dublin,
Okay.
but all the entire family was Sligo.
Well, there's nothing wrong with Sligo and Tipperary. Lots of great people have come out of Sligo.
No,
I mean,
I take the pride in it, and I'm glad that we were able to trace it back and find out. It's actually a little townland of only 480 acres, which I don't think any of the little homes are still standing on that townland. Yes, Currigan.
Okay.
It's just south of Ballymote in Sligo.
Okay. Well,
Just a very just a little thing. So,
other guests I've had on here from Sligo, Charlie McGettigan, he won the Eurovision Song Contest. He was a guest on this podcast too, and he's Sligo. I have a lot of friends in Sligo, like lots of friends in Sligo. My historian friend who's on here a lot is on the border of Sligo there, and he's been on. We discussed the Good Friday Agreement and other things. Might come back to him in a moment, but tell me about your interest. Just give us a bit of background about your education growing up then, okay?
Well, how I, moving forward, I used my opportunities that my parents gave me and God gave me to begin studies, and studied and read both in an undergraduate college here. But then when I got to law school, I had the privilege through the University of San Diego School of Law to come and study at Trinity College. And during that was 1985. So we're 4 years off of the hunger strike.
You were an exchange student.
Yes.
For Trinity. Well, ironically enough, I was.
Yes, spent a whole semester in Dublin studying international law.
Very good.
So
I studied in Galway. My professor in Galway was Michael D. Higgins, who's now the president of Ireland, and I spent a few years there, and then I moved on.
Oh, yes.
To the College of Marketing and Design in Dublin. So I was there in 1981, which is poignant to the story you're going to tell us shortly about the hunger strike in 1981, because I was right immersed in it. So you studied at Trinity College. I was in the College of Marketing and Design. I was like more a poor cousin. We were allowed to use the library, but we were far from poor, believe me.
As far as I know, maybe we met at Donahue's and we had a pint and we didn't know it.
That happens to me a lot, actually, to say the least.
Well, hey, it doesn't bother me a bit.
It doesn't bother me a bit
but
either.
I wanted to mention one thing that actually is the, if you want to call it the trigger for me to really, for decades, wanting to write this book, but it goes back to 1981. So I'm in my freshman year of college, and for me, there were three major networks here in the United States: NBC, CBS, ABC. And when they began covering, now we were aware of the hunger strike and the troubles. So this is not some new thing that I was observing, but through the modem of television, to watch when the first Bobby Sands began his strike, and watch all 10 go through the strike, and watch it every night, that had a very, very cutting impact on me. These men were not that much older than me, if at all. And that struck me. And also being in the level of my background, I was stunned by it.
Michael, that's very poignant.
So it then led me...
That's very poignant, because if Bobby Sands was alive today, he would be 70 years old. So, relatively speaking, he'd still be a young man. So he'd be, if he was alive now,
and
70. He was born in whatever year it was. I will do a fact check there for you. So you're 100% correct in saying they were actually like your age, all 10 of them. All my listeners to know, we're talking about Bobby Sands' hunger strike, 1981. 10 young Irishmen were allowed to die on hunger strike under the rule of Margaret Thatcher, who was the Iron Lady, as she was called, the Prime Minister of the UK at the time. And then we'll get into that more in a moment. Let's get right to the edge of the book, okay? So what more did you do to write the book?
The other thing was to write the book was just now based upon where not only what stuck in my mind for decades, watching this unfold on television,
Okay.
but also watching what unfolded for the Good Friday Agreement. How did it get there? How did we get from point A to point B? That was one aspect. But the second is I am a very strong believer in that governments, whether they be here in the United States or they be anywhere else in the world, have to be held accountable. If you are going to try, and we can talk a bit about this later,
Mm.
but if you're going to make the false premise that these were criminals committing crimes and try to actually, this is based on the British declassified documents. This
Okay.
isn't my opinion. I'm
Okay.
basing what I'm saying on the documents. If
I
you
got
want
that.
to classify them that way, then you then as a government have a higher responsibility for the
Correct.
humane treatment and for the manner in which you're going to incarcerate individuals.
Mm.
You don't get to choose because of what you allege they were convicted of, which let's go
Mm.
with the premise that the Diplock system fairly convicted these men. I don't carry that. There's enough documentation on
No.
that I won't even get into at the
Mm.
moment. But if you're going to convict men and women
Mm.
and you're going to call them criminals, then they actually have basic human rights as incarcerated individuals in that system. And these were completely, by these documents and by every account, these were shattered. And part of this was to also hold the British government, and as would be the United States or any other country that would commit these type of
Mm.
atrocities, hold them accountable by looking at their own words. They said it, not
Mm.
me. I'm not steering something. They said it, and that's why I looked at the declassified
Absolutely.
documents to pull it
For
out.
the for the purpose of my listeners, because 1981 was back then and now we're now, they may not understand how the hunger strike, why Bobby Sands and the 9 other gentlemen all went on hunger strike. They were looking for a certain political status in a jail. They were in jail, that we know, and that they knew too. But they didn't want to be considered criminals. They were looking for political prisoner status. In other words, we're not criminals, we are political prisoners. And the 5 simple things that they asked for was very simple, really and truly. They wanted to wear regular clothes, not a uniform saying, I'm a criminal. That was number one. Number two was be allowed to read a book or something like that, be allowed to get one letter or one parcel a week. That's number three. And there was a couple other simple things. So for Maggie Thatcher and her government to refuse all of the above and let one by one die at a time. Bobby Sands was elected to the British Parliament. As a matter of fact, he was the youngest MP ever to be elected to the British Parliament. But under provisional Sinn Féin rules, we ignore the British Parliament despite having won a seat there. That's important. So I'll let you continue where you picked off with the other hunger strikes as well.
Sure. Uh, when we look at that, you know, Bobby Sands and being elected from his deathbed in Long Kesh
Correct.
was elected the MP and died of starvation on May 5th of 1981. He then was followed by Francis Hughes. Francis Hughes had gone on the hunger strike 2 weeks after Bobby Sands, and then he had passed away several weeks later. Two other men then passed away subsequent to that. That would have been Ray McCreesh and Patsy O'Hara. They happened to pass away on the same day, only hours apart. The fifth one that had passed away was Joe McDonald. He was the oldest of the hunger strikers, and this was his second go around inside Long Kesh. Unfortunately, he was initially swept up in 1971 during Operation Demetrius, the internment, August 9th, 1971. He got swept up there. He initially was on the Maidstone, which was used as a floating internment camp till he was sent to the cages at Long Kesh, which were basically Nissen huts. They look like something if your viewers would recall World War II and the huts that were used for concentration camps and prison camps. That's what the Long Kesh prison camp looked like. It then was followed up with the other hunger strikers. That would have been looking, you would have end up with, you had Karen Doherty, you had Kevin Lynch, you had Thomas McElwee, and then the last one, I know there's another, I missed one, but you had Michael Devine, who was the last man to die on hunger strike.
Well,
they all, what was it?
I like the cover of the book because you have in the on your cover you have listed all 10 of them, which is good. And I commend you
Correct.
for writing this book. It does a lot of work in producing a book. I know from producing my own book, like the edit.
Which, by the way, I want to compliment you on your book.
We're throwing book this here now.
I would recommend your viewers to give that a go and and give it a read. I would recommend that very much.
Okay, I'll keep going about the Bobby Sands thing in Dublin. I was a student, as I said then, and we all protested. And there was protests all over the world, actually, not just in Dublin and the north, everywhere, all over Europe, including here in New York. As a matter of fact, here in New York, Irish bars closed for a few hours in respect of Bobby Sands and the hunger strike. Side effect of something like this, and I always say, you can forgive, but you can never forget. And love and war have a lot in common. Easy to start and hard to end. So what Bobby Sands did in the hunger strikes, it incited and enlightened every Irish and Irish American like yourself and like myself to what the hell is going on here. And we woke up and we said, this is not right. Ireland, 26 and 6, we need, and if I go back to 1916, when James Connolly of the Easter Rising was taken out and he was shot while sitting in a wheelchair by the British, among his friends as well. De Valera was exempt because
American citizen.
He was an American citizen. Pardon my language. I was about to call him a blind fucker. He was born here on Lenox Hill Hospital, and he got exempt because of his Irish passport. And then he was the guy also, once I'm floating on it now, perhaps organised the assassination of Michael Collins, who made the first treaty agreement with the British in London with a few of his colleagues. And on that night, he said, I'm signing my own death wish. And sure enough, a few months later at Ballynablaw, Collins got a bullet and De Valera got rid of him. As you said earlier on, World War II started. Winston Churchill asked De Valera for a small, small favour. And that was like, could he park some of the ships and things at the Irish ports? Not a huge favour if you're a nice neighbour. And De Valera gave him the middle finger. And Churchill said, you'll be sorry. And Churchill also said, if you do me the favour, I'll give you back your back garden, meaning the 6 counties. So Churchill was willing. England doesn't want the 6 counties. It's a pain in the fucking ass. It's like a hemorrhoid to the British. It's a pain in the ass to everyone, actually. But De Valera screwed up all that. And when the war was over and Churchill would not buy our beef from Ireland, and we had a huge recession, and that's why a lot of people left Ireland. All of Leitrim left. I think the last person to leave Leitrim was told to close the door and turn off the light bulb, But continue, Michael, sorry.
No, one of the things just to back up a little bit, one of the most fascinating things I found in just getting along to the subject matter of how this hunger strike could have been avoided. The documentation I uncovered showed that there was an initial hunger strike in 1980 with 7 men, based upon the 5 years of conditions that were in Longkesh, the H blocks. That would have been the blanket protest. That would have also been the dirty protest that was carried on. But it had to go to the basic 5 demands that were taken away from them, that were initially given to them because they were given political status as prisoners of war in 1972. Having said that, moving all of that forward, there was no movement for 5 years, and a hunger strike was called in 1980. The short version is one of the hunger strikers was very ill, was taken off the hunger strike, but the British government at the time, this is under the beginning of the Thatcher regime, had agreed that they would not give all of the 5 demands, they would give most of the 5 demands, but the most significant that they wanted was association and wearing their own clothes. That was given to them. That was promised. In fact, I had the opportunity this summer when I was in Ireland. I visited Belfast, and I had the opportunity to talk with who I consider my friend, Danny Morrison, on this issue. And he also confirmed that, but I can confirm it also through declassified British documents.
Okay.
Essentially what happened was the British then reneged on that deal, which then led to the second hunger strike, which was the 1981 hunger strike. During that process, right in the middle of when the hunger strike had just started a couple of weeks, a declassified document recorded a meeting between John Hume and Margaret Thatcher. The cut to the chase of that document, which I discuss in my book, is that John Hume, the day before, had a conversation with Jerry Adams, who was with Sinn Féin at the time, still it was leading Sinn Féin. John Hume was informed by Jerry Adams that he was going to have the meeting with Thatcher the next day, and that Hume could convey to her that if the same identical offer that they reneged on for the 1980 hunger strike to end it was reoffered, all of the hunger strikers would come off the hunger strike, accept that, and there would be no further protest of any kind. John Hume went into great detail in describing that and discussing that with Margaret Thatcher. Now, I'm going to interject my own opinion here for just a second. John Hume, obviously being SDLP leadership at the time, very much for the unification, but also very much opposed to any violence. He had a lot at stake politically, probably even personally, to have a meeting like that. And what I'm getting at with this is his conveyance of a message to Margaret Thatcher after having a conversation with Jerry Adams, to me, tells me that he had high confidence in the information he was being provided. Absolutely. It was not something that it was just shooting from the hip. We'll hope it happens, and it kind of dismisses the fact that, the provisional IRA and the hunger strike, they're all liars. They'll just want more later. No. John Hume's not going to stick his neck out like that, in my opinion. He's not going to do something correct. So during that conversation, Hume makes a very strenuous request, or makes it strenuously, tries to make Margaret Thatcher understand that you have an opportunity to end this. All you have to do is, through back channels, let them know you're going to offer this. They'll come off of this and we will be done. You will be the one who has solved it. You will have not capitulated. It's the same offer you gave them back in December of 1980. And her emphatic answer was absolutely not.
Well, she was one stubborn bitch.
Hume took another stab at this during that meeting and is trying to explain to her, you can end this. It's not a capitulation. They had already accepted what you have said you would give. They're not asking for any more than what you have already offered from your own administration. And she still said no. She went into the whole, which the documents also reflect. She had a mantra of saying a crime is a crime. These are criminals. And going into what she didn't use these words particularly in this meeting, but what she called salami tactics, which in political parlance, salami tactics are, okay, I asked for this. And I cut a little slice off of salami, just like at a deli. And then I come back and ask you for another slice of something. And I ask and I ask and I ask. Eventually, you have no more salami left at the deli. So that's the analogy of a salami tactic. And that's what she continued to refer to this to, is if we do this now, it will just lead to the terrorists using salami tactics.
Well, she should know.
This could have been ended quickly. No one had to die. No one had to die, but she did not want to capitulate, or what she considered capitulation. She did not want to reoffer what she had already offered, which everybody knew on the planet that she had offered.
Okay, fair enough. As I said earlier on, I was in Dublin in 1981, living right through this episode. And I think Thatcher came to meet Charles J. Hoy, and the parents, mothers especially, of the hunger strikers, I think they came to Dublin with a letter like begging Hoy and Thatcher to do something. Hunger strike.
Yes.
Every single day, you're a day closer to death. And the typical PR after the meeting, it was like Hoy was kissing ass with her and she was like admiring him. And they said, yeah, we'll do something. They did absolutely nothing. Now, meanwhile, all during that too, Charles J. Hoy was the Prime Minister, Taoiseach of Ireland at the time, and it was a little recession. He told all of us to tighten our belt. Meanwhile, he's buying shirts from Paris, Charvet expensive shirts. He had a mistress for 27 years. Her name was Terry Keane, and it's well known because she wrote a book called Sweetie. That was his love name from her to him. And he was dining and wining with her, and she was a gossip writer for one of the papers. So talk about a fox pissing in the henhouse, that being her and him too. And they were having this romance while all this more serious stuff was going on in Ireland. Now, meanwhile, Bobby Sands, while in prison, wrote poetry. He wrote a lot of poetry. He wrote a song back home in Derry. He did a lot of art. And I think you have something there on your wall. A lot of the prisoners got involved in crafts and stuff like that for their sanity.
Yeah, I'll just move over for a second.
Please
Move
do.
my camera for a moment so you can
Okay.
see what you're talking about.
Yes, the clock, yeah. So a lot of the prisoners, I remember down in the West of Ireland, we always bought crafts. Some of the guys would carve a clock out of Irish oak and put a clock on it. I admire your one because it's a H, symbolizing the H block. Bobby Sands got married while in prison. He has two sisters and one brother. He has a son who would be in his 50s now, and he has a granddaughter who plays Gaelic football, Irish football, for I think County Down, but I can be fact-checked on that. So a lot has come out of the history of the hunger strike. We probably wouldn't have the Good Friday Agreement if it wasn't without the hunger strike. As I said earlier on, the IRA got more intense and more involved. They perfected their war on guerrilla warfare, which was initially instigated by Michael Collins, who was perhaps one of the best soldiers and negotiators of all time. So, Michael, where can we get this book, and tell me more about it?
Places you can get the book, if you want to be able to click on, you can go to my website, which is www.michaelcmentel.com is where you can go, and you can click on to my publisher, which was McFarland and Company. I thank them for their at least accepting my manuscript. Also the Barnes & Noble, and you can go to Whitestone for those who are in Europe. And you can also go to Amazon, eBay, and other sources online to get the book.
Okay, that's very interesting. I did mention that the book I produced, that there's some gun running in that book too. The gun running there involves, after the Bobby Sands thing, a lot of Irish Americans like yourself got very involved in money and money and money and more money. And in Stoney's book, there's a story of the gun running where the arms were going back to Northern Ireland, but the boys here had to disassemble the guns and tag them with A1, A2, A3, A4, A5. A bit like buying a piece of furniture in that store, I can't think of the name of it, and putting it all together. So when all the shipment got back to Belfast, that goes there, that goes there, and that goes there, and now you have a rifle. Pretty clever.
Very much ingenuity on how to provide the armaments. Yes.
Well, out of necessity comes greatness. Out of necessity comes greatness. You know.
Necessity is the mother of invention. Absolutely. Cool. If I wanted to mention something else, if I may, John, sure. I hope I'm not getting off track here for you. No. But we were just talking about the first meeting with John Hume and Jerry. When Hume talked to Adams and then Hume talked to Thatcher. There is a bookend, if I can call it that, to this conversation. Because Margaret Thatcher, during this whole entire time publicly, is playing that Iron Lady, hard-nosed, I'm not giving in. If these hunger strikers want to die, they can die, which she actually, that's a quote. But what she is doing behind the scenes is just absolutely shocking in the context of she is working as desperately as she can to find a way to end the hunger strike, but she wants it on her own terms. And she is beginning to reach out to other parties and have her cabinet do serious investigation. A little backdrop to one document that actually floored me. And I did not know this existed till I found it. The backdrop of this is Garrett Fitzgerald he succeeded Haughey as Taoiseach, and he is going to have a conversation with Thatcher, where she's going to congratulate him. Meantime, Joe McDonnell is very much on the brink of death. She is also beginning the process of having MI6 reach out behind the scenes to the Army Council, the Provisional IRA, to see if she can negotiate directly with them, not the other way around. So having done all of this, she has on July 2nd, she has a normal cabinet meeting with her ministers. Those documents are generally confidential, but then years later they're disclosed. It's nothing to look at. Following that meeting, there is a document that is labeled highly confidential. And it was a meeting with certain ministers following her cabinet meeting, a specific group of ministers. The subject matter was the hunger strike, the challenges that it's having, but what they got into is what would be the solutions. One portion of it brought up force feeding, which was clearly shot down at that point. But what came up was the idea of giving back, ceding the North back to the Republic of Ireland, lock, stock, and barrel, get rid of it. With the concept, with the proposition being, all we're seeing is British troops and British citizens dying. Leave it to the Irish to solve the Irish problem. And I'm almost quoting the document. I discuss it in my book. This stunned me. It absolutely stunned me that there was even a remote consideration of giving back the North to end this whole wretched situation. She then, at the end of the meeting, directed that these particular ministers should evaluate all circumstances and all solutions available, no matter how unpalatable or unpleasant they may be. So this is the first indication that I had seen or I'd even heard of, and I've not read of anything of this nature, where she even gave one inkling of a consideration to cede the North back. Now, practically speaking, there was no way that the Republic was any condition to be able to take over the North. It would have actually probably led to more violence. It would probably overshadowed any violence that was going on at the time during the hunger strikes. You would have had Ian Paisley, his whole army. You would have had everybody uprising. So it was probably a pragmatic situation of not to cede it back. But the concept of considering it during that time was just stunned me. Absolutely stunned me.
I have two comments to make there, and yes and no, because times changed. Before Ireland became part of the EU and we joined Europe and all that, a lot of things changed, like socially in particular in the south of Ireland. Before that, some of these northern snobs, as they always did, they looked down on the Irish as being poor Catholics. We're praying, we don't know how to do this, we don't know how to do that. And then all of a sudden, condoms are illegal. They thought we can have sex like we have to do according to Catholic Church. Then gay marriage came in, then gay rights came in, and they're looking at us like we're falling behind here. And the statistics, 2.1 in their family. It was Jerry Adams that told the Catholics 18 years ago, keep banging out the babies. Now the Irish population of Catholics in the north is higher than the population of Protestants. And as well as that, I guess, Thatcher herself would never have been a prime minister if it wasn't for the IRA, because her predecessor told her, you better get ready, Miss Iron Lady, because I feel the IRA are going to take me out. And they did. They assassinated him. And dare I mention Lord Mountbatten, who is the grandnephew to Queen Elizabeth. And he gave freedom to India 6 months ahead of schedule. Great guy, nothing wrong with him. He was just on a fishing trip off the coast of Sligo. And the IRA, as a retribution, gave him a peaceful ending, as we say on the death notices on Midwest Radio. He died peacefully and was buried in the water. So complicated and sad history on all parts. And a lot of good people, deep down, as you probably mentioned there in your last phrase, the British find Northern Ireland a pain in the ass, and they would rather get rid of it completely, and only because it's costing them money. And when Boris Johnson decided to leave Europe, he completely forgot about Northern Ireland. He probably forgot about the Rock of Gibraltar. He forgot about the islands off Argentina. They are so pompous, they forget what they own and who they own. And they think They're our subjects, not me. But the United Ireland, I think, will come in 2030, according to the ambitions of Mary Lou for United Ireland. And we all have to keep thinking that way. Otherwise, why did everyone die in vain, you know? I'm going to leave you with the last speech here.
No, I think what was I think just to move it forward from there, and what it builds on what you were saying, it actually dovetails to get to how did this hunger strike and how did these 10 men change the whole political structure and dynamic, not only of the North, but what the dynamic would be in the South. It's clearly a path, and the documentation shows it. We know it empirically. We see it. We felt it. We talk to people about it. But to have it actually documented that this change was occurring and how it moved its way through, I think is very important. What I think the two things happened that I think were the biggest. Obviously, when the hunger strike ended, most of the 5 demands were granted to the remaining hunger strikers because it ended October 3rd of 1981. Later on, though, when that was the first thing. So now there's this kind of recognition and it's kind of moving forward and they've stopped the hunger strike. The second thing that happened, I thought that also was of significance, is at the October 31st Ardhesh that Sinn Féin had. And I had a good conversation with Danny Morrison about that this summer, about that Ardhesh. And to remind your viewers, the Ardhesh at that time, there was an open session and they were trying to talk about how do we move things forward, going forward from the hunger strike, basically looking at political or armed struggle or recognizing, letting Sinn Féin do what Sinn Féin politically potentially could do. Danny Moore stood up at that Ardhesh and he said, essentially, is it not possible that with a ballot paper in one hand and an Armalite in the other, that we can take over in the country of Ireland? That was such a dynamic political shift that it then allowed Sinn Féin to begin its progression politically and become what I consider to be a force in politics, both North and South, which we've seen now, circa 2024, 2023. Michelle O'Neill, First Minister, Sinn Féin. You see the largest party in Ireland, Sinn Féin. But what you have seen is then even just 2 years after that, Gerry Adams is elected MP. You then have moving forward with trying to form an assemblies, which the first one didn't work, but you saw everything gravitating politically towards what then became the Good Friday Agreement. And every single step of that can be laid back at those 10 men who sacrificed.
Well, thanks to everyone involved, including Senator George Mitchell and indeed Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton.
Oh, sure. I'm not discounting them, John, by any stretch. Please don't take me wrong on that.
No,
it's more this not really pushed it forward.
No, the British themselves said, about time. And timing is everything, too. Speaking of which, Jimmy Grady, are you ready to sing a song for Michael and myself? That's my young singer. He's going to sing Caledonia for us today.
Wonderful.
Yeah, he's a good singer.
I don't know if you can see the changes that have come over me in these last few days. I've been afraid that I might drift away. I've been telling old stories, singing songs that made me think about where I came from, and that's the reason why I seem so far away today. But let me tell you that I love you and that I think about you all the time. Caledonia, you're calling me. Now I'm going home. And if I should become a stranger, you know that it would make me more than sad. Caledonia's been everything I've ever had. Oh, I have moved and I've kept on moving, proved the points that I needed proving. I have lost a friend. that I needed losing, found others on the way. I have tried and I've kept on trying, stolen dreams, yes, there's no denying. I have traveled far with my conscience flying, somewhere with the wind. But let me tell you that I love you, and that I think about you all the time. Caledonia, you're calling me, and now I'm going home. And if I should become a stranger, you know that it would make me more than sad. Caledonia's been everything I've ever had. Now I'm sitting here before the fire, the empty room, the forest choir. Oh, the flames that couldn't get any higher, they've withered now, they've gone. But I am steady, thinking my way's clear, and now I know what I'll do tomorrow. When the hands are shaking and the kisses flow, then I will disappear. But let me tell you that I love you, and that I think about you all the time. Caledonia, you're calling me, now I'm going home. And if I should become a stranger, you know that it would make me more than sad. Caledonia's been everything I've ever had. Caledonia's been everything I've ever had.
So, Michael, I'll get you to ask again where people can buy your book. That's important. So, I'm going to ask you one more time. How do people buy your book? Where can they get the book?
Thank you, John. First, you can click on through my webpage to www.michaelcmentel.com, and you can also go through Barnes and Noble.
Okay.
You can go through Stones, and you can also go to my publisher, McFarland and Company, or you can go to either eBay or Amazon, and it's available there as well.
Well, lucky for me, I bought it at your book launch, which was here in New York City, and that's where I met you, so it was a pleasure to meet you. Thank
Yes.
you, Jimmy, for the song. Caledonia is the Scottish word for Scotland, and it's a nice song. But
I love that.
it's a great song. Anything else for you to add before we wrap it up?
Other than just thank you so much, John. I look forward to our meeting again in New York. And I only want to say you're watching your podcasts. They're very, very informative, very good. And also I like the one on the election. That was very, very, very informative. So I hope all of your viewers continue to view.
Well, I do my best. And my father taught me, always tell the truth and shame the devil. So with that, I'm going to sign off in my native language, Shin Gael. That's Gaelic for that's the story. So I say Slán. So Michael, Slán, good talking to you. It's good to talk. And if my listeners like the podcast, subscribe and hear more stories like this. Michael, thank you very much.